Everybody, I'm Ebony K. Williams, along with Kat Temp and Guy Benson. This is the Fox News Specialists. Just a short time ago, President Trump unloading on the controversy around his response to this weekend's racist violence in Charlottesville. His remarks coming amid an infrastructure policy announcement. It was intense.
The statement I made on Saturday, the first statement, was a fine statement, but you don't make statements that direct unless you know the fact. It takes a little while to get the facts. You still don't know the facts. There was no way of making a correct statement that early. I had to see the facts, unlike a lot of reporters. I didn't know David Duke was there. I wanted to see the facts. I think the driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism, you can call it murder, you can call it whatever you want. I would just call it as the fastest one to come up with a good verdict. That's what I'd call it. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
All right, Guy Benson, I will start with you and quickly come to you, Kat Temp. I heard the president in those remarks, Guy, really double down to me on his initial response, his Saturday response to this tragedy that happened in Charlottesville. Obviously, I said my piece yesterday. I will double down on it. What struck me the most, and there were a few things, when the president says he didn't know David Duke was there. But then we see David Duke just moments ago on Twitter saying, "Thank you, President Trump, for your honesty and courage to tell the truth about Charlottesville and condemn the leftist terrorist in Black Lives Matter and Antifa." My thought, Guy, is if the president wants to kind of play dumb around the David Duke issue, that's one thing. But when he says he doesn't know he was there, and David Duke clearly knows who President Trump is, at this point, how long does that narrative even remain something that we can entertain and really not flat out laugh at and reject?
I mean, look, there's a lot to unpack in what we just watched there from the president. And I've been scrolling through Twitter and seeing some of the reaction, and some in the press, I think, are reaching for the smelling salts over everything that he said. And I think there were some points that he made that are legitimate and totally defensible. Where he really lost me was when he was saying and objecting, saying there were some fine people in that protest in Charlottesville on the alt-right. He was trying to draw this distinction between neo-Nazis and white supremacists and some of the good people, quote unquote. But this was a white nationalist rally. He was talking about the torch evening, right? They were chanting things like, "Jews will not replace us." There's nothing good about that.
It's nothing
and
ambiguous.
So, look, and let me say this. There are people in America, many of whom I'm sure are watching us right now, who may object to or have qualms about taking down these statues, who are good people and who are not racist.
Absolutely.
But they were not at a white nationalist rally, which is what occurred on Friday night.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Kat, something else in the initial part of President Trump's remarks this afternoon, he said that he wanted to get all the facts and he wanted to preserve judgment till he had more facts. I have to say, this might be the first time I've heard President Trump show that level of restraint around fact gathering.
It's honestly crazy for me to have to comment on this right now because I'm still in the phase where I'm wondering if it was actually real life, what I just watched. It was one of the biggest messes that I've ever seen. I can't believe it happened. If there's any sort of car attack, normally I'm surprised that he didn't come out and say that it was a terrorist instead of, waiting
Islamic
to say
terrorism.
something. This was clearly an Islamic terrorist because he's done that before he's had all the facts. He's not measured in his criticism. He goes after people as soon as he has the inkling. For it to take 48 hours That is something he has never done before. And yeah, it shouldn't be some kind of bold statement to say, yes, a gathering full of white supremacist Nazis doesn't have good people in it. Those are all bad people, period. And the fact that that's controversial makes me want to, I don't know if I should just like laugh. So I have like too much eye makeup on to start crying right now. It's disgusting.
Yes, we're guitar specialists. I will say I made a personal plea to President Trump yesterday. Obviously, he did not take that to heart. I asked him to call out David Duke by name. He says he didn't know he was there. Well, sir, David Duke certainly knows who you are and what you stand for. We'll now meet today's specialist. She is a former CIA Middle East analyst, a former senior State Department official in the Obama administration, and a Fox News contributor. Her specialty, though, rooting for Ohio State football. All right. Marie Harvest here. Oh, man. And she's a criminal defense attorney, has 11 years of trial litigation experience, and has represented numerous individuals in federal court cases. But she specializes in collecting sea glass from Florida shores. Whitney Boan is here. Thank you, ladies, for being with us. So, again, so much to unpack. What stood out to you, Whitney?
Oh, gosh. You know, I'm with Kat. I had a hard time trying to keep it together just watching that press conference because it devolved so quickly from good points. Like Guy said, it was points like, you know, I would like to have all the information before I say something. I'd like to encourage that for President Trump. Like you said, this is a new phenomenon if that's what's happening. However, what's really troubling is that this became more about, you know, we're concerned about statues and we're concerned about permits than we are concerned about the fact that we have neo-Nazi white nationalists threatening the safety of Americans based upon their race or their ethnicity or their religion. And that's where it went, and he refuses to acknowledge that. And it's almost like stealing victory from the jaws of defeat, because this would have been really easy from a PR perspective if from the beginning President Trump had just said, Nazis are bad, and this isn't okay. It's not okay, and it's never going to be okay. And I don't support this, and I don't care if they have shirts on with my name on it, and they're carrying banners with my name on it. And it's irresponsible for him to say, like you said about David Duke, in terms of when David Duke comes out and says, I'm encouraging white nationalists and KKK members to carry out President Trump's agenda of making America great again, and this is what it means. And then to stand there and be like, you know, I didn't know that David Duke was there. It's irresponsible. Yeah. It's disappointing.
Marie, what stood out to you?
I'm with everyone else who's already weighed in on this. I think he's doing this moral equivalence again, and we saw it on Saturday, and he got a lot of pushback for that. Yesterday, a lot of people said he finally, you know, did the right thing, and even though a lot of us thought it was too little too late. Everything he did yesterday was just undone. I mean, that was an epic meltdown. And if we, you know, I don't know why he is so hesitant to criticize the alt-right. I think we all have, and Nazis, I think we all have theories on that. But Kat's right. He fires off tweets. What after the Merck CEO, it took him, what, 15 minutes? And then he says, well, but I need to get all the facts. I can guarantee you if that had been a Muslim in that car, he would have said something right away. It would have been much more inflammatory. He would have gone after that person. And I think we have to, in this country, there's clearly a lot going on right now about these statues, right? Not just in Charlottesville, in Lexington, in Gainesville, Florida, across parts of the South. You know, I went to UVA. I know what's going on there. We need a leader who can help our country navigate through what is a really tough, difficult, complicated set of issues. And we don't have that in our president. And that scares me, and it makes me sad. And for every Republican that complains that Democrats like me say the party now is in bed in part with the KKK and Nazis, the leader of the party, the president, is not doing anything to make people believe otherwise.
Well, I was just going to say real quick, Guy, those pictures we were just showing were in Durham, North Carolina, and I used to practice law in front of that courtroom and walk past that statue every day. So I understand, and I grew up in North Carolina. It's a deep-seated, intense, divisive, powerful issue. Go ahead, Guy.
So just a few points in response, Marie. I think that what the president's defenders would say watching that press conference was he did repeatedly specifically attack Nazis and white supremacists. He called the driver of the car a terrorist and a murderer. That just happened today. My problem, as I said at the beginning, was sort of lumping in all of these alt-right people together and trying to separate who are good people and who are bad people at a white nationalist rally. But to say that he did nothing to dissuade Americans that the right doesn't stand for Nazism, I don't think that that's fair. And to your other point quickly, when you talked about navigating these difficult issues on the statues, for example, the monuments, I don't think the media necessarily helps when immediately, when he's making a point about Washington and Jefferson being slave owners and where do you draw the line about whose statues you take down, people with blue check marks on Twitter are saying, oh my God, he's comparing Robert E. Lee to George Washington. That's not a fair assessment of what he's saying. So if we want to have a reasonable discussion about some very tough issues, we shouldn't intentionally mischaracterize some of the more reasonable things that he's saying while correctly calling out the less reasonable things that he said.
So the problem with that, though, is because of all the crazy things he says, the reasonable things just get lost. And he loses credibility to even be a thought leader, if we can even use that term about President Trump, on this issue. And I think that while he, yes, said bad things about Nazis, he tried to balance it in those remarks and said, well, there are some good people there. And guys, the alt-left, which is a term I think he just invented, because I've never heard it, the alt-left is just as bad as the alt-right.
Well, the alt-left exists.
But I don't know where to start with that.
Right. Well, they are bad, and they have done bad things. They have been violent, and that's very bad, and that should be condemned when it occurs. However, somebody was murdered at this rally, and it was not done by someone on the out left. Think about if someone that you love was killed, and the response was, yeah, a lot of people murder people, and it's bad every time.
Right.
No, you condemn the specific murderer and their motivation, and you examine that issue.
Whitney, let me get your take on this, because you said, Guy, and correct me if I'm wrong, that President in these recent remarks did unequivocally call out the driver as being, what did you say you called him?
He said you can call it terrorism and a murderer.
Okay, so he's talking terrorism. He said, I think he said, you could call it terrorism.
He didn't say terrorist.
You could call it a murderer. I'll call it the quickest to a verdict, whatever. But this is also what President Trump tweeted out a year ago. Anyone who cannot name our enemy is not fit to lead our country. Anyone who cannot condemn the hatred, oppression, and violence of radical Islam lacks the moral clarity to serve as our president. For me, Whitney, that sounded like a lack of moral clarity, pretty much in the president's own words.
I mean, and that's the problem here. Where the president keeps breaking this down into moral equivalence, where, and to Guy's point, you know, when he outcries and says this person's a murderer and he may be engaging in terrorism, what the problem becomes is he lacks any real authority. He lacks any real passion or belief in a way that Americans are looking for in terms of stand up against hate, when it's always followed with but. It's always but. It's always, he's a murderer, but there were other bad people there. And those people are alt-left, and those people are liberal or whatever. You know, it lacks any firm statement. And so, Ebony, yes, I mean, what we need is a president who can stand up and say something that's even consistent with what he said a year ago in terms of people who he believes are terrorists on domestic soil or people who he believes are terrorists on foreign soil.
Well, the FBI in the past year has put forward a number of reports about the fastest growing threat of homegrown terrorism in the United States is from these extremist white nationalist groups.
Guy, go ahead and get here.
Well, yeah, and that's a real concern. Then you also look at situations like the shooting at the baseball field with Steve Scalise at the FBI, for some reason that boggles my mind.
Also domestic terrorism.
Well, they called it not domestic terrorism.
No, it was, though. It absolutely was.
Yeah,
and you're right. That's the hypocrisy. You are correct, Guy. There is hypocrisy there.
When you're gathering statistics, if you're not including the Scalise shooting as an act of domestic terrorism, people say, well, what the hell is that about? So my thing is this. You can very unequivocally condemn what happened in Charlottesville, condemn the vile hatred of the white nationalists and neo-Nazis, and then put a period on the sentence and end it there.
Exactly.
But if we're going to have later a conversation about political violence in this country, you cannot airbrush the violent left out of that conversation.
I think that's
they are
fair.
part of it.
I think that's fair. And I will say this as well, when it comes to this conservative Republican thing, I think you were mentioning this, Marie, I would never, and not that you did, but I don't put this on Republicans. I don't put this on conservatives. I don't put this on people that hold conservative beliefs, because I think that is a miscategorization of their politics. And I think it's a sad day in America that for many, that distinction has become unable to be clear. And I think that this rhetoric is a large part of that.
And it's also because the leader of the Republican Party is so wishy-washy on it. I mean, we've all heard what Bob Dole said when he accepted the nomination. We've heard George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan. Every leader of the Republican Party, when the KKK and white nationalists have tried to make common cause during elections, have said very clearly, we don't want any part of this until Donald Trump. And I was really heartened by all the senators who came out over the weekend, by the Republicans like Ted Cruz, Chuck Grassley, Orrin Hatch. But the leader of the party and the leader of our country isn't doing the same thing. And that's a problem.
Yes, up ahead. A serious potential blow to the conclusion and the allegations in the Russia probe. Stay with us.